other parties in the region feel that they need to join as well.
Okay, Barbara Pletoshir, thank you very much for that. Well, Russia has ramped up the frequency and intensity of its attacks on Ukraine, with the country saying it experienced the most attacks in one day on Tuesday since the start of the year. The Ukrainian Interior Minister Ihor Klimenko said Russian troops fired on 118 settlements in 10 Ukrainian regions, including Kyiv, Donetsk and Kherson, in a span of 24 hours. The news comes days after Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky hosted a bipartisan delegation of US congressional leaders to discuss the latest developments on the front lines and key defence needs. One of the leaders was Illinois Congressman Mike Quigley, who also is co-chair of the Congressional Ukraine Caucus. I spoke with him a little earlier about the trip. Congressman Quigley, thank you for joining us. Now, you've just returned from a trip to Ukraine where you met with President Zelensky. It wasn't your first trip there. What has struck you as having changed in between visits?
First, if you had told me from day one of the war that would be a year and a half in and that would be in this situation, I would have been happy. Obviously, we thought this war would be over in 3 to 4 days. Now it's a year and a half, and we're at a pivotal point, given the counteroffensive moving forward. And I thought it was important to show the flag, to show our continued support. So a major part of this trip was a diplomatic one to assure our Ukrainian friends that we are still with them.
Now, Ukraine said today that Russia has bombed 118 towns and villages in the last 24 hours, more than any other number of targets hit this year. What was President Zelensky's main ask of you when you were there?
I think President Zelensky's main ask is that we continue to support more of the same, obviously, to continue to push the Russians back. I'll say this, though. I think mostly they want to make sure we're going to be there. I think there are obviously things that would concern an ally at this point in time. The most obvious is Congress's inability to govern, the fact that we're funding 45 days at a time, that we had a speaker change in 3 weeks where we accomplished nothing at all, and the bitter attacks that are taking place inside Congress. And we're showing the world that we're not governing particularly well. And then second, obviously, the war between Israel and Hamas blows Ukraine's news stories off the front page. And that has its implications, as President Zelensky has said publicly.
Just on the point there you raise about Congress, we've already seen Speaker Johnson split out the Israel funding from the rest of the funding that President Biden has asked for, including that for Ukraine. Do you think, will he be able to rally colleagues to keep the focus, to keep the attention and the interest in the Ukraine funding?
That was a major part of this trip, to come back and educate our colleagues as what's happening and why it matters, why they should be optimistic, to remember why we're in this conflict. It's the same reasons we fought the Second World War. It's the same reason we formed the United Nations and NATO, and that we can't let a sovereign democratic country be wiped off the face of the earth. It's in our interest to help Ukraine. So Speaker Johnson has talked about splitting this up. What will probably happen is there'll be a Senate version that combines most of the measures that the administration has pushed forward. It will include funding for Ukraine, Israel, concerns about Taiwan, our southern border. That will come to the House, and I believe that will pass.
And Congressman, just on Israel and the US support for Israel, given the rising death toll in Gaza, the humanitarian situation there, the allegations by many humanitarian agencies and the UN that Israel is breaching humanitarian law, should the US look again at its unwavering support for Israel?
We hope that the conflict will be short-lived, that the entrance into Hamas will be limited, and especially in time. What's really important to us is that we maintain and make sure that humanitarian aid gets in there. At the same time, we recognize Israel has an absolute right to defend itself and not forget yesterday's headlines of the massacre that took place in Israel by Hamas. This is much less about the Palestinians. This is about Hamas, their connection with Iran, and the threat that poses not just there, but in the rest of the world.
if it's not so much about the Palestinians as you put it there, but nearly 9,000 of them have been killed at this point.
Look, and I just recognize that Hamas is the most cynical use of its citizens it can possibly imagine. It completes a massacre in Israel and then hides behind these citizens. So the extraordinary challenge for Israel right now is to protect itself, to retaliate, and do so in a way in which the enemy is embedded in the civilian population, because that's what Hamas does.
Okay, we're out of time. We'll have to leave it there for now. Congressman Mike Quigley, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Pakistan has started to arrest Afghans as the country begins a nationwide crackdown on foreign nationals it says are in the country illegally. Millions have fled from Afghanistan to Pakistan over the years, most recently to escape the Taliban takeover in 2021. The Pakistan government says it's